The lock on my cabin door was already splintered when I got there. Thick tendrils of smoke curled from a makeshift fire at the porch steps, where two women stood like sentinels, identical like reflections in a warped mirror, all sharp eyes and smug smiles. They weren't tourists. They were Karen and her sister, bone deep in that ruthless kind of control only a pair of Karen sisters could wield. The smell of burnt wood and something acrid hit my nose. Charred remnants of my welcome mat, maybe? Their voices cut through the summer air like knives. "Get out! This lake cabin is ours for the weekend. Our wedding. Now!" one barked, stepping forward, eyes glittering with that deadly mix of entitlement and threat. Before I could answer, one of them slapped a flickering torch against the wood beside me, sparks flying up like fireflies caught in a trap. "We've got eyes everywhere," she hissed. "Homeowner Association's got our backs." It wasn't a warning. It was a promise. I planted my boots firmly on the dirt. My voice was calm, but carried a hard edge. "You think you own this lake? Not today." The way they looked at me, like I was nothing but a pebble kicked from their path. It wasn't fair, but that's the world I lived in now. What happened next wasn't just an invasion. It was the first punch in a fight for everything I had left. The next morning, there was a sealed letter pressed under my door, its edges soaked in rain from the early storm. It came from the Homeowner Association, a bureaucratic behemoth ready to swallow anyone who dared resist. The letter was a masterpiece of menace, an inspection scheduled for my property, citing a string of fabricated complaints about the state of my lawn, the color of my porch, even the direction my fence leaned. The penalties were astronomical, enough to break anyone's spirit. Funny thing was, my neighbors who once greeted me with a wave had suddenly turned statuesque, eyes darting nervously when I passed. One afternoon, I found myself standing at the edge of the lake during our last community meeting. It was less about discussion and more like a parade of judgment. Karen and her sister took center stage, orchestrating whispers and glares like a conductor with a sinister symphony. The crowd's mood thickened, eyes narrowing until I felt the weight of 1,000 accusations pinning me down. A woman near the snacks table murmured, "He's the problem here," loud enough for many to hear. Didn't matter what truth was anymore. I swallowed hard as a gust of wind rattled the leaves. The smell of damp earth filled my lungs. Here I was, the villain in their eyes. The trust I'd earned over years dissolved with each passing glance. Amid the suffocating silence of that night, a faint knock disturbed the quiet. I wasn't expecting company. When I opened the door, there stood Jenna, the local librarian from the town library, young, curious, eyes sharp but cautious. "I found something," she said, slipping inside before I could say no. She pulled out stacks of papers from her bag, documents, meeting minutes, signatures. Her voice trembled slightly. "There's something off. These HOA protocols, signatures don't match, and some weren't even there." She looked at me with the kind of determined hope that had been missing from my world for a while. For the first time, I felt a crack of light breaking through the storm. Maybe I wasn't alone after all. Karen's next move came faster than I thought. She managed to secure a temporary claim to my property, a cruel joke disguised as a legal ruling. Before I knew it, my phone rang with a cold voice telling me inspectors were on their way, shutting down any access I had to my own home. The uncertainty stung worse than any physical pain. I was cut off, isolated. But then there was Tom, our neighbor who, up until recently, had kept me at arm's length. Tom was a steady presence, a war vet with more skeletons than medals. But when Karen's guilt trip started weighing too heavy on the neighborhood, he stepped up. One night, he showed up at my porch, slow steps crunching dry leaves, and said, "You're not the enemy here. I've got your back." That moment felt like a lifeline tossed into choppy seas. Funny how people surprise you when you're drowning. One evening, with the smell of wood smoke lingering from my half-burnt porch, I decided to push back. I slipped a small camera into my jacket pocket, an old friend from better days, and waited until dark. Hours later, I caught Karen's sisters meeting with a shady contractor, exchanging documents that didn't quite add up. That was the moment I realized the battle wasn't just about the land. It was personal, financial, and ugly. In the shadows, my hands trembled, not from fear, but from a storm of old scars and fresh anger. I thought about my family lost years ago, the trust shattered, the isolation I knew all too well. I whispered to myself, "I've been where you are." Then everything spiraled. The HOA meeting, where I hoped to make my case, turned into a public trial. The crowd's whispers were daggers, and when an old friend, someone I trusted, stood up and accused me of forging evidence, the ground beneath my feet crumbled. The betrayal stung harder than any legal blow. I felt my throat tighten, heart pounding like a drum in my ears. "Say that again, I dare you," I growled under my breath, but the damage was done. I stumbled home that night, the house feeling colder, emptier. The weight of the fight wasn't just outside anymore. It had settled inside me, a bruised and battered heart grappling with the loss. But here's what I didn't expect. Using those shaky moments, I turned the tables. At the next HOA gathering, I unveiled a strategic twist, 2 simple words that changed the game: procedural errors. The crowd fell silent as I pointed out how their own rules had been twisted and bent by those who claimed to defend them. The pressure shifted, spotlights catching Karen off guard. The power she wielded so confidently started to unravel. Yet, I stood on my ruined porch, the board's acknowledgement bittersweet. I didn't get my home back, not fully, but I reclaimed something more: respect, truth, and a quiet strength forged in the fire. "You think you own this lake? Not today." That's what I told them, and those words still echo when the wind picks up. But that night, everything changed. The quiet ring of my phone startled me. It was one of the sisters, soft voice, almost human for the first time. "She told me why," I said later, to no one but the dark walls. "She's scared to lose control after what happened to her family." As I sat alone, the fire pit glowing dimly, I realized this war was bigger than land or pride. It was about fear, power, and the cracks we all try to hide. Funny thing you didn't expect. Sometimes the hardest battles teach you more about yourself than you ever thought possible. Have you ever stared down your own shadow and come out different? I have. So, what would you do if you were me? Would you stand your ground or just walk away? If this hits close to home, hit that like button. Stick around, there's more to tell. The porch light flickered once, then died, swallowing the cabin in sudden darkness. The letter from the Homeowner Association hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't just some routine notice. It was a tidal wave wrapped in bureaucratic venom. They claimed my lawn was a public eyesore, my fence non-compliant, my paint off-color. A laundry list of petty complaints, each backed by signatures I knew were forged. The penalties stacked up like a bad joke, fines that could strip me of everything, leaving me with nothing but memories and smoke. I stared at the paper, the rough grain digging into my palm, smelling the damp after-rain scent faint on it. It was designed to break me, to scare me off. Next thing I knew, the neighbors' faces were colder, harder. A few whom I'd shared backyard barbecues with now looked through me like I was a ghost. The wind picked up, carrying whispers that felt heavier than any storm. At the community meeting that evening, standing near the lake where the water lapped against worn docks, the tension was palpable. Karen and her sister took their usual spot like queens on a throne, smiling, condescending. Their eyes scanned the crowd, calling out allies with subtle nods. "You've got to understand," Karen said, voice sweet but sharp as broken glass. "We're just here to keep things orderly." The crowd nodded, some murmured agreement, others just folded their arms, eyes sharp. Suddenly, a neighbor by the snack table spoke loud enough for those near me to hear. "He's the problem. Always has been." Heat rushed to my face. I clenched my fists, feeling the rough bark of the wooden railing beneath my fingertips. It had been years of quiet living here, and now they wanted me gone, as if I was a stain on this little lakefront community. Funny thing is, I never thought neighborhood politics could feel like a slow chokehold. That night, the oak floors creaked beneath my feet as I paced. Outside, crickets sang their relentless song. The smell of damp leaves mixed with the faint smoke from last week's burn welcome mat still hung in the air. I poured a glass of whiskey, its burn a reminder I wasn't ready to give up. Then there was the knock. I wasn't expecting visitors, especially not at this hour. Opening the door, I found Jenna, the librarian from town. She looked worn but determined, clutching a bag stuffed with papers. "Got a minute? I found something off," she said, stepping inside without waiting. She pulled out stacks of documents, minutes from meetings, sign-in sheets, official-looking papers that made my tired eyes narrow. See here? These signatures don't belong to the people they say. Some folks didn't even attend those HOA meetings, she whispered, voice tense. I felt a spark of hope lighting something deep inside. For the first time in weeks, maybe there was a crack in the wall I'd been pushing against. Jenna's enthusiasm was contagious, even if her fingers trembled holding those papers. She wasn't just a librarian, she was my unexpected lifeline in a world turning cold around me. If you ever felt like the weight of the world was driving you to the edge, you'll get me on this. But, as the saying goes, hope can be the cruelest thing. Not long after, Karen landed another blow. Against all odds, she managed to get a temporary claim stating the cabin was rented out for her wedding weekend. It was cruel, a legal joke that isolated me. My phone buzzed with calls from inspectors, code enforcers, people I'd never met, now telling me to stay off my own porch. Right there, cut off from my own sanctuary, I felt something inside snap. The world shifted, tilted, and all I could hear was the pounding in my chest. But then, in the haze of despair, came Tom, our neighbor, gruff, quiet, a man who wore his scars like armor. He showed up one evening, leaves crunching under his boots, eyes steady and sure. "You're not the enemy," he said, voice low. "They just like to make you feel that way." Tom's rare kindness was like a hand reaching through storm clouds. You know, when you think everyone's turned their back, the smallest sign of loyalty can light a fire. One late night, with the old porch smoke swirling in the chilly wind, I decided to fight smarter, not harder. I slung an old camera around my neck, the kind I hadn't touched in years. Sitting quiet in the shadows, I watched as those sisters met with a contractor notorious for under-the-table deals, swapping papers that looked suspiciously fake. My hands shook, not from fear but a cocktail of adrenaline and exhaustion. Old memories flooded in, loss, loneliness, but also a stubborn flame. "I've been where you are," I muttered, the cold night air biting at my face. Things hit the fan fast after that. The next HOA meeting was less a forum and more a firing squad. I stood there, heart racing, as whispers turned into accusations. Then, like a hammer, I felt it. Betrayal. Someone I'd considered an ally stood up and pointed a finger, accusing me of forgery. My mouth went dry. "Say that again. I dare you," I mumbled, barely holding myself together. By the time I stumbled home, the bare floorboards felt colder, the silence in the cabin deafening. Sometimes losing more than just the fight is the hardest part. But then came the twist. At the following HOA session, I rolled out what I'd quietly learned. Their own rules had been twisted by Karen and her cronies. The room fell silent as I pointed out procedural errors that could invalidate everything. Spotlights finally caught Karen off guard. Her confident mask cracked, power shifted like sand underfoot. Standing on my damaged porch, I didn't win back the cabin, but I reclaimed something more: respect, truth, and a quiet strength forged in fire. "You think you own this lake? Not today." Those words still echo whenever the wind whistles through the trees. That night, the phone rang. It was one of the sisters. Jenna told me later what she said, her voice softer than steel. "She's scared," Jenna said, "of losing control, of what her family's history might mean." Sitting alone by the dying fire pit, the flickering light danced with shadows. This wasn't just a fight over land. It was fear, power, and the cracks we all try to hide. Funny thing you didn't expect. Sometimes your toughest fights teach you more about who you really are. So tell me, have you ever stared down your own shadow and come out changed? And let me know. If this hits close, hit that like. Stick around. There's more coming. The night air hung heavy with the scent of wet earth and forgotten smoke as I locked the ruined cabin door behind me. The fractures in the wood felt like the fractures in the fight I was up against. Everything fragile, everything ready to break. Let me back up a bit, because the battle was just getting louder, not quieter. After the HOA shoved that menacing letter under my door, I figured the next move was obvious. Appeal to reason, talk it out, maybe get some neighbors on my side. Boy, was I wrong. I showed up at the HOA office the next morning, papers in hand, ready to argue facts and fairness. Instead, I got a cold welcome from a sea of bureaucratic smiles hiding every ounce of venom. The clerk barely looked up, muttering about protocols and deadlines, as if I was just another troublemaker hanging on their patience. But here's where things took a darker turn. Karen's sisters had already stacked the deck before I even arrived. Documents I trusted were replaced, signatures forged, timelines redrawn. The inspection became a showing of force, not fairness. Funny thing though, I caught a flicker in those forged pages, a tiny difference in handwriting that pulled at something buried deep in me, like noticing a crack in the wall just before it falls. Jenna, that librarian, she had the eye and the courage to dig into those papers while I scrambled to keep my head above water. In the local diner, the chatter was tense. Some neighbors whispered doubts about the HOA's motives, but fear kept their voices low. Others just laughed behind their hands, swallowing the narrative Karen spun. The sisters were masters of manipulation, sowing discord like seeds in spring. One afternoon, as rain hammered the tin roof, Tom, the war vet neighbor, pulled me aside. His voice was rough, a quiet storm. They want you out, but they can't have you without a fight. His eyes, hard as their resolve, held a glimmer of something I hadn't seen in a while, solidarity. That night, I sat in the dark, fingers tracing the worn grain of the old oak table. Memories flooded back, 'cause how I used to stand up, unafraid, before life chipped away at me. I hadn't forgotten those days. Not yet. What would you do, stuck in a corner with shadows closing in? I ask, because sometimes just holding on feels like a battle won. Days later, things escalated beyond letters and whispers. Without warning, inspectors showed up on my property, flanked by stern faces and clipboards filled with checklists designed to find fault anywhere. They blocked my access to the tool shed, halted repairs, and gave me that look. The one that says, "You're on borrowed time." Karen's sisters appeared like clockwork, grinning, their eyes flashing with something cruel. "Rules are rules," Karen said once, voice syrupy but laced with steel. "Don't forget who's watching." The scent of wet grass mingled with the harsh clang of a dropped wrench echoed through the empty yard. I felt smaller, trapped in a cage built of paper and power plays. But here's the kicker. Not everything was as hopeless as it seemed. Jenna came through again, slipping me copies of meeting minutes that hadn't made it to the archives. Her fingers trembled as she handed them over, but her eyes burned with conviction. What she uncovered was ugly. A secret deal between Karen's sisters and a local contractor who, coincidentally, had been hired to repair parts of the community. The contractor wasn't just fixing fences, he was paving the way to marginalize me further. Jenna called it a financial squeeze, but it was a stranglehold, plain and simple. For a man like me, who valued truth over trickery, this was the stake in the heart. The breaking point came at a neighborhood cookout, a supposed gesture of goodwill that stank of betrayal. I thought maybe, just maybe, I could find allies face to face, break down walls built on gossip and fear. Instead, Karen's sisters were there, every smirk and side glance sharper than any blade. That's when I saw it, a neighbor I once trusted slipping away, drawn by promises whispered behind closed doors. When he caught my eye, the flicker of doubt vanished, replaced by cold calculation. "Looks like the wind's changing," he murmured as he mingled with Karen's camp. It hit me like a punch. That night, surrounded by faces that blurred into shadows, I realized that this fight was bigger than land or laws. It was personal betrayal at its rawest. Have you ever had someone you counted on walk away just when you needed them most? The weight of it crushed me, but something in that darkness sparked a different kind of fire. If this was a fight, I'd play it smarter. No more straight punches, no more empty words. Pulling from the reserve of grit honed from years in a game that never forgives, I set a trap. A quiet, strategic move waiting to catch Karen and her sisters off guard. Sitting in my shadowed cabin, the silence thick and heavy, I whispered to myself, "This isn't over. Not by a long shot." But here's what they didn't expect. Sometimes the biggest strength lies in the smallest details. So, what would you do when you realize your best fight isn't in the spotlight, but in the shadows just out of view? Think about that for a second. If you're still with me, maybe drop a sub. There's more to this story. Trust me, it only gets messier from here. The morning sun sliced through the curtains, casting long, sharp shadows across the cabin floor. It was too quiet that day, the kind of silence that presses against your ears and makes every creak feel like thunder. Here's what happened next. The temporary claim Karen's sisters had dragged through town wasn't just paper, it was a barricade. I woke to a voicemail from a cold voice, clipped and official. Code enforcement was enforcing every possible restriction. No repairs, no guests, no peace. Walking outside, the air smelled of fresh-cut grass and something metallic, like the tension before a storm. I found my phone buzzing with messages from inspectors blocking my driveway, flashing badges I didn't recognize. Every door I tried to open was met with a polite but firm, "No access." The cabin, my sanctuary for years, was turning into a fortress I couldn't enter. That's when Tom came by, boots crunching gravel with a steady rhythm. "They want to squeeze you out, but we're not done here," he said, eyes scanning every corner like a coiled spring ready to snap. There was something about his presence, a quiet defiance that gave me a fraction of breath I didn't know I had left. Late that evening, wrapped in the chill of creeping autumn, I sat with Jenna at that shabby kitchen table cluttered with papers. The glow of a single lamp painted her features in stark relief, young, determined, and somehow unbreakable. She slid over a folder thick with documents, the kind of proof you don't stumble across but dig out, piece by piece. Hidden financial ties between Karen's sisters and the contractor weren't just shady. They bordered on fraud. It hit me like a punch to the gut. "You think you've seen all the dirt until you dig beneath the surface," Jenna said quietly. "These aren't just bad neighbors, they're running a racket." Her words settled heavily as rain slugged against the window pane. The neighborhood cookout was supposed to be a chance for peace, a truce maybe, or so I hoped. Instead, it was a masterclass in manipulation. Karen and her sister strutted through the crowd, smiles sharp as razors, radiating the kind of power that made even long-time neighbors flinch. I caught snippets of hushed conversations painting me as the villain, the troublemaker disturbing their perfect little world. Then came the look, the one neighbor I'd shared countless conversations with, now avoiding my eyes like a stranger carrying a secret. When our paths crossed, he offered a tight-lipped smile, then slipped away, pulled by the invisible strings Karen had woven through the community. That night, the weight of isolation slammed into me hard. Ever been surrounded by people and felt utterly alone? It's a quiet kind of hell. But here's the twist. That same night, I couldn't shake the feeling that the fight wasn't just outside, but inside me too. The frustration, the anger, they were wearing me down. I found myself pacing the wooden floor, hands balled into fists, voice rough as I muttered, "I didn't sign up for this to lose everything." That's when the plan inched clear. Instead of a frontline battle, I'd wage a quiet war, smart, unpredictable. I dug deep into HOA bylaws, procedural details that most wouldn't dare question. I looked for cracks so small they'd slip past unnoticed. And I found them. When the next meeting rolled around, I was ready, not with anger, but cold strategy. Nobody expected me to pull the rug from under the establishment's feet using their own rules. So, what would you do if the whole world was stacked against you, and your only weapon was a silent and unbreakable truth? Think about that. Still here? Appreciate you. Let's keep going. This story's far from over. The porch creaked under the weight of the evening breeze, and the smell of damp wood mingled with a faint hint of burnt leaves. The stage was set for what would become the most tense gathering this neighborhood had seen in years. Let me set the scene. The neighborhood hall was packed, the air thick with anticipation and whispered alliances. Karen and her sister sat poised, their smiles thin and sharp, while the crowd's eyes darted between us, waiting for sparks to fly. I stepped up slower than usual, heart hammering, but mind razor sharp. Instead of throwing punches, I laid out a quiet storm, spotlighting the procedural cracks I'd uncovered in their grand plan. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, voice steady, "the Homeowner Association's own rules have been twisted and bent against me." Whispers roared into murmurs. The power in the room shifted like a subtle breeze turning into a storm. Karen's smile faltered, her eyes flickering dark like a candle about to blow out. The room filled with heavy silence before a neighbor, once skeptical, whispered, "They played us." I looked around, eyes locking on faces wrestling between loyalty and doubt. Karen's sister leaned over, sneering, "You think rules will save you? This is our game, and we make the rules." My answer was steady. Not anymore. It felt like a turning point, but the victory was not without cost. Outside, the cabin was battered. The lower porch had collapsed from neglect and storms, a symbol of everything I'd risked and almost lost. Tom, ever steady, helped me piece together the broken wood, our hands rough and tired, but spirits unwilling to break. That night, I sat alone, watching flames from the fire pit, thinking about what winning really meant. I looked back at that wrecked porch and realized victory wasn't about the cabin. It was about keeping my dignity and standing tall. "You think you own this lake? Not today," I muttered, the words tasting like iron and resolve. But the fight left its scars. The neighbor who'd turned away? He didn't just walk off. His betrayal cut deeper than any law or fine. Trust, once shattered, is hard to rebuild. Sometimes you win battles but lose pieces of yourself, the quiet moments no one sees. Yet, even in victory, there's reflection. One late evening, my phone rang. It was Karen's sister, voice soft but haunted. "She's scared," Jenna told me after the call. Scared of losing control because of a family history filled with secrets. I sat back, the fire crackling low, shadows dancing on the walls. This wasn't just a fight over land anymore. It was about fear, power, and the desperate need to hold on to something slipping away. Funny thing you didn't expect? Sometimes the harshest battles teach you more about yourself than any quiet day ever could. Ever stare down your own shadow and come out changed? That night I did. And I still wonder, if you were in my shoes, how would you stand your ground? The wind whispered cold through the broken slats of the porch as dust settled, shadows stretching long across the peeling paint. The house might have been battered, but inside, something was stirring, something fierce, raw, and ready. Funny thing is, sometimes it's in your darkest moments that the smallest details become your greatest weapons. Let me tell you how it unfolded. That shove from the HOA meeting, their procedural blunders exposed, finally rattled the ivory tower Karen and her sister had built. Yet, they weren't done. No, they retreated for a moment only to regroup and strike smarter. When I caught wind of an unexpected shift, a quiet whisper about missing documents and forged evidence, I realized I was staring at not just a legal fight, but a web of deceit that stretched further than I'd imagined. This wasn't a simple land grab, it was a calculated campaign. One night, under a sky thick with stars, Jenna showed up again, eyes gleaming with excitement and fear. "These papers," she said, sliding a folder across the table, "they're the missing pieces. More than just fake signatures, there's money moving, off-the-books deals tied to Karen's circle." The air felt heavier, the sense of mildew and old paper pressing in on us. I ran my fingers over the darker side of what should have been a community, realizing the fight had morphed into something uglier, with stakes far beyond my porch. Then came the moment I lost control. At the next community potluck, supposedly a way to mend fences, the tension snapped. Karen's sisters prowled like lions among the crowd, their smiles sharper than ever. A whispered insult from one of the sisters was the spark. I let my temper flare, words slashing. "You think you can scare me off my property? I've faced worse." The room stiffened, stares turned hard, the fragile social balance shattered. In that moment, I wasn't the steady, calm man I tried to be. I was raw, angry, exposed. Ever felt that rush when your mask falls and the fury can't be contained? That night, I sat by the dying embers of the fire pit, breath shallow, heart pounding in my ears. Old ghosts haunted me, family gone, trust broken, peace shattered, but there was no turning back. I whispered to the ghosts, "I've been where you are." And with a bitter laugh, I made a choice, to fight smarter, not just harder. The final clash loomed. I harnessed every scrap of evidence, every loophole, every whisper Jenna and Tom helped me uncover. At the decisive HOA meeting, I dropped the hammer, exposing not just the lies, but the cracks in their moral armor. Karen's sisters, once unshakable, faltered under the weight of their own schemes. But victory came with a cost. The cabin was battered, the trust in my neighborhood fractured. Tom looked at me, eyes tired but steady, and said, "Sometimes you win the fight, but lose the war." I nodded, feeling the weight of it all. That night, the wind howled through the broken windows, a reminder that on this lake, power shifts like the tide. And what would you do if the fight meant losing what you love most? Think about that. If you're still here, still listening, maybe drop a like. The story's almost done, but the lessons, they stick. The fire pit's glow flickered weak against the night, casting long shadows across the cracked porch. I sat alone, the cabin behind me bruised but standing, just barely. The lake mirrored the dark sky, calm on the surface but hiding restless currents below. Funny thing is, fights like this never end the way you expect. After everything, the betrayals, the broken rules, the silent wars, I found myself in a strange place. Not victory, not defeat. Something more complicated, something real. Karen's sister called that night, her voice soft, almost human, scared. Not the storm I expected, but a tremor. She's afraid of losing control, Jenna told me later. Her family's history, shadows she can't outrun. I thought about that, about fear and power, how they twist people, how they make monsters of neighbors. It wasn't just about who owned the cabin anymore. It was about who owned themselves. I stood on that battered porch, the wind biting through the tattered curtains. The neighbors' faces had changed, not all, but some. Quiet respect, grudging maybe, in their eyes. I didn't get my home back, at least not the way I wanted, but I walked away stronger, wiser, scarred, sure, but not broken. You think you own this lake? Not today, I said aloud, the words a defiant echo. Looking back, the most expensive price wasn't the land or the fines. It was trust. Broken deals with neighbors, alliances crumbled like old wood. Sometimes standing your ground means standing alone. But here's the kicker. In losing what you thought mattered most, you find what really does. So here I am, telling you this story out in the open, at Karenology, because this fight, it wasn't just mine. It's about every one of us who's been pushed out, put down, told to walk away. What would you do in my shoes? Would you stand tall or fold under the weight? If you've been in the trenches, you know there's no easy answers, but there's honor in the fight. And if this story hit you, even a little, maybe hit that like button. There's power in knowing you're not alone. Because some things don't burn. And the lake's waiting, ready for the next story.